Here we are at Flowhive HQ, and we've got something different here for you today, and we've also got a special guest, so please stay tuned. We're going to be talking about native pollinators today. Often you'll hear us talking about the amazing European honeybees and how much honey they can produce, but let's not forget about the native pollinators. There's about 20,000 species of native bee in the world, and some of them produce honey and some of them don't. Some of them just make a little nest in a little reed or a little tube or a hole in mud. And Joe, my nephew, is going to show you some beautiful pictures that my sister has taken of those native bees. And there's a teddy bear bee, which is this fluffy big one. There's a blue banded bee. When we first launched Flowhive, we put out this beautiful image of a blue banded bee, and people thought we were doing CGI computer graphics because the bee is so stunning with its blue stripes. And there's also the neon cuckoo bee. See if you can work out which one's which, and that'll be a great test to see if you can work out which one's the neon cuckoo bee, which one's the teddy bear bee, which one's the blue banded bee, and which one is the, we've also got a leaf cutter bee. So they're native bees to Australia. We're also going to be hearing about native bees in North America. And our special guest is actually going to show you all about that. But our pollinator house here is, you can just see it behind me here. And that project, I'll just speak a little bit about that because we've actually used it to raise funds to do some amazing work and to partner with the Pollinator Partnership in North America. So it uses Flowhive offcuts, and we've upcycled them into this beautiful pollinator house you see here today. And it gives homes for some of those solitary bees. But for us, it wasn't so much about building and selling a pollinator house. We wanted to make it 100% profits are donated for habitat regeneration and protection. So this is a fundraising product, and we use those funds to then help protect our pollinators. And so one of the things we've done is partner with the Pollinator Partnership and create some native seed grants. And those native seed grants will be across North America, and you can apply for them. And it's part of the bee-friendly farming project. And Anthony Colangelo is going to tell us more about that, and he's actually got a presentation to show us. So it's really exciting to have you, Anthony, and please tell us more about the Pollinator Partnership.
Awesome, thanks so much for having me. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, so you can all see my PowerPoint.
Yes, excellent.
Awesome. Yeah, so thanks again for having me here today. I'm super excited to talk to you about the amazing role of the pollinators. So my name is Anthony Colangelo, and I'm the communications coordinator at Pollinator Partnership. And I'm speaking with you today from Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, Canada. So at Pollinator Partnership, we are the people who protect pollinators, and we do this through collaboration, research, education, habitat creation, and policy. So just an outline on what I'll be covering today. I'll be talking about what pollination is, why pollination is important, who the pollinators are, the world of bees, and how to help and get involved. So to begin, what is pollination? Pollination is how plants reproduce, and more specifically, it's when the pollen from the stamen of one flower is transferred to the stigma of another flower. This can be done by the wind, but actually majority of the flowering plants on Earth require some kind of vessel in order to reproduce. And that's where the pollinators come into play. Not only are pollinators critical in the reproduction of many flowering species, they're also crucial in the production of our agricultural crops. So here's a beautiful poster that was done for Pollinator Partnership. that shows the tight relationship between our food and pollinators, specifically bees. And to further this point, I'll show you a real-life example of the importance of pollinators to our food crops. So seen here is a grocery store on a normal day. We have our brightly colored fruits and vegetables. And so this would be a grocery store, with bees and pollinators. So I'm going to change the slide. So this is what the grocery stores would look like without bees and pollinators. So you can see you're missing, a ton of the fruits and vegetables. You're missing a lot of the food products. If I walked into the grocery store and it looked like this, I'd be really sad. So I'll show it again. So this is with bees and pollinators. And then this is without. So just, again, demonstrating just how important they are to our foods. So who are the pollinators? This is a beautiful graphic that was featured on our poster this year and is a great depiction of the main categories of pollinating animals and insects. So at the top left, you see we have our lesser long-nosed bat. Actually, today is the start of Bat Week, celebrating these beautiful and amazing animals. So you can see the lesser long-nosed bat, she's flying towards a flower, and that's a saguaro cactus. And she's flying towards the flower because inside is something what's called nectar, and that provides carbohydrates for a bat's diet. And so while she's drinking the nectar, a whole bunch of pollen grains are getting stuck on her nose and her head in the fur. And then when she kind of visits another flower, all those pollen grains get transferred to the next flower, and that's how the pollination occurs. So bats are super cool. Then, of course, we have our hummingbirds, which are some of my personal favorites, butterflies, and then even on the right side of this illustration here, we have a beetle. And beetles are said to be some of our first pollinators, and they actually evolved before bees. So they're great pollinators of very primitive species of plants, such as magnolias and water lilies. And then towards the bottom of the illustration, we have our cute and furry bumblebee on some thistle. And then that insect at the very forefront, the green insect, that's actually a bee too. And that's what we call a metallic green sweat bee. And that's on a milkweed flower. So today I really want to focus on bees, as bees are the best documented and most efficient pollinators. So usually the first thought that comes to mind when thinking of bees are honeybees. Honeybees are fantastic pollinators that play a crucial role in the pollination of our crops. But what some of you might not know is that honeybees are not native to North America and were brought over from Europe in the 17th century. Honeybees are amazing, but I especially want to focus today on the native bees in North America. So there are over 4,000 species of native bees in North America, and some of the main categories can be seen here. I love this illustration because it shows just how diverse bees are. Some can even be all green, as seen on the very left and very right. So again, those are the metallic green sweat bees, which are often mistaken for flies, but they are in fact bees. And when the sunlight hits them at the perfect angle, they really do look like flying emeralds. They're really cool. And here's another great illustration, again, showing bee diversity. So this larger bee here is called the large carpenter bee, which is the species we have in North America. And then seen beside her is the smallest North American species, known as the fairy bee, which can be as small as 2 millimeters in size. So another cool fact about native bees is that majority of them don't nest in colonies or hives like honeybees. Many are actually solitary, meaning that each female bee is her own queen, foraging for pollen and nectar on flowers and building her own nests without the help of worker bees. So seen here on the very left, we have a mining bee. Just as their name suggests, they are excellent at mining tunnels. And what the female bee will do is she'll fly around collecting pollen from flowers, and then will create little pollen pillows, which is what these orange balls are. She'll then lay her eggs on these pillows, and this will be the food that the developing larva eats as it matures into an adult bee. This whole setup can be compared to an underground condo with each egg in a separate apartment. Then at the top, we have the large carpenter bee. What they do is they use their strong mandibles or jaws to chew old soft wood, creating tunnels where they lay their eggs. And finally, on the right side, we have a leafcutter bee. These bees especially love to visit rose bushes, cutting perfect semicircular holes in leaves with their scissor-like jaws. They then take these leaf bits and use them as insulation and protection around their tunnel nests in old wood, as seen here. So this was just a quick glimpse at how cool and diverse bees are. But at the moment, as I'm sure you're all aware, bees and pollinators need our help as many populations are declining. This is due to a number of factors that, when combined, really put a pressure on pollinator populations. These include parasites and disease, climate change, pesticides, and especially habitat loss. But luckily at Pollinator Partnership, we have a number of excellent programs that you can be a part of to reverse this trend. So one of the best things that we can do for pollinators is plant for them. At Pollinator Partnership, we have these beautiful planting guides that are ecoregion specific that can be downloaded for free on our website. This includes guides for the United States and many parts of Canada. And at the back of each guide is a list of about 100 native plants that support pollinators that have been vetted by local experts. We also have our bee-friendly farming program, which supports participants and pollinators in North America and globally. Our BFF program has 3 categories that allow for engagement with all participants in pollinator conservation, while addressing their landscape goals. These categories include Bee-Friendly Farming Certified, Bee-Friendly Farming Partner, and Bee-Friendly Farming Garden. By becoming a Bee-Friendly Farming member, you can help preserve and protect pollinator populations by implementing positive, incremental changes on your property. Our program helps farmers incorporate affordable, simple, and science-based guidelines. This includes offering nutrition and habitats for bees and integrated pest management strategies. BFF members are an essential part of keeping our pollinators healthy and food supply abundant. Also be on the lookout for BFF Australia, as we're planning to work with more Australian organizations going forward. And finally, looping Flow back into this, we have our Bee-Friendly Farming Flow Native Seed Grant, which was made possible because of Flow's generous donation generated from sales of their Flow Pollinator House. This funding has been used to develop a native seed grant for current and new bee-friendly farming certified members in the US. This is such a great grant opportunity, and the 50 awardees will be provided up to 3 pounds of region-specific native seeds sourced from Applewood Seed Company. This is fantastic, as it means more seeds in the ground and more flowers to support pollinators. And this grant is still open for applications, which I believe closes on October 31st. So definitely apply if you're already a bee-friendly farming member. And if you're not, then you can apply for bee-friendly farming and the grants kind of at the same time. So yeah, just an amazing grant and amazing program. And with that, thanks so much for having me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Anthony. It's such important work you're doing in a world where we're losing species at an alarming rate. And anything we can do to support our pollinators is hugely important so that they can support us and the entire ecosystem around us. It's so good that bees are on the agenda these days. It's been a long time coming, and it's really important that we start looking at all species in general and trying to save them, but in our case, especially the honeybees, because and the bees, because of the role they play in joining the dots. How are trees going to produce their seed that are used to being pollinated by pollinators if there's no pollinators anymore? So you get this crazy collapse starting to happen if we cannot get enough pollination happening. So it's very, very important work. If you've got questions for Anthony or myself, put them in the comments below and we'll get to answering those. I loved how you showed the diversity in the bees. You had a huge bee and a tiny little fairy bee.
Yeah, it's amazing.
A lot of people, I think, just think of a bee as the European honeybee, because that's the one humans have dragged all around the world with us, because they're such amazing pollinators and they produce so much, and we love them for that. But it's so good to be able to expand that into the diversity of bees that we have. Have we got any questions coming in?
Yeah, thanks, Cedar and Anthony. That was great. There's a question coming in, actually, Anthony. We obviously here in our apiary, we have the European honeybees and we've got the Pollinator House. And just wondering, do the same honeybees work well with your native bees?
Yeah, so with honeybees and native bees, they can definitely live in harmony with each other. especially if you're planting tons of forage and tons of flowers. That gives both honeybees and native bees plenty of resources to use. And again, so when they're going to flowers, they're visiting for pollen, which is their source of protein, and then nectar, which is their source of carbohydrates. So just like humans, bees also need a very diverse diet. And so different flowers provide different nutrient levels, which is why you always want to kind of plant a whole variety of flowers. So yeah, basically the bottom line is if you're planting lots of forage, then honeybees and native bees are good together.
Fantastic. And what about the native bees? Do they produce much honey?
So the only other bee that I know of that produces honey are bumblebees. And again, so honeybees and bumblebees are social, meaning that they have workers and whole colonies. And so they use that honey as their resources over winter. So they're actually feeding on that, like that's their source of food. So bumblebees also produce honey, but not to the same extent as honeybees. So that's why we don't usually see, bumblebee honey at the markets. But other than those two main categories of bees, other bees don't really make honey. They kind of use those pollen balls, as I showed in one of the previous illustrations, and that's what the larvae use for feeding.
We have a native bee species here in Australia that gets called the sugarbag bee, and it's been harvested here by the Indigenous Australians for the last, could be 100,000 years.
Oh, wow.
And it's still being harvested today in traditional ways as well. So that's you can get probably half a kilo to a kilogram of honey from those bees a year. So nothing like what you get from one of these hives where you a bucket full of honey, but still it's really interesting, and it tastes so medicinal because they mix the pollen and the nectar together and produce something that's completely different to what we're used to as honey.
Well, that's amazing. That's so cool.
Fantastic. There's a question coming in wondering, what do bees do at night? Do they go to sleep?
Well, that's a really good question. So bees do sleep. And actually, if it's the right season, I know here a lot of our flowers are done for the season, but sometimes you'll see the male bees, they kind of they sleep in like individual flowers in there. And then the female bees, for the solitary ones anyways, they'll sleep in their nesting cavity. And then honeybees, I believe, yeah, they have their nice colony that they can rest in. That's a cool question.
Sometimes when you look at the rear window of your flow hive, you can actually see the cross section of the cells and a bee having a little nap down the cell. And
so cool.
As a bee died in the cell, and you give it a little tap and it doesn't move, and you give it another little tap and it wakes up and comes out, and you go, "Oh, sorry, I just woke you up from your shift work sleep."
That's funny.
Cedar, this is maybe a question for you. Just with the pollinator houses that now Flow will be selling, will they be available to everyone? When will they be available?
They'll be available across Australia and the USA, and they're actually available for pre-order as of now. It's something we build up the offcuts, and we do another run cutting cutting pieces of offcuts together with our laser machines to make the pollinator houses. So it's something we do this time of year as a fundraiser. So if you do want one, you will have to get in quick. They do go fast, and if you miss it, you'll have to wait till we do it again next year.
Yes, get in quick. Anthony, a question. With the farms that you're going to be doing the native seed grants for, do they have to be a certain size?
Yeah, so the farms for the native seed grant need to be under 100 acres, I believe.
Okay, so smaller people can apply?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they also need to be so under 100 acres and within the United States for this round of for our grants.
Oh, fantastic. Luke's asked a question, wants to know, how do you let the native bees and the pollinators know that you've got a cool house for them?
That's a good one. Basically, what I've seen is that if you plant flowers, or you have a honeybee, or just a bee house, they'll kind of find it on their own. But if you want to really attract bees into your bee house, then again, it kind of goes hand in hand. You want to have a nice pollinator garden beside it, because bees, they can fly far distances, but they also want to, like, find food relatively close. They don't have to use too much energy. So if you have a nice pollinator garden by your bee house, then that's more of an incentive for them to move in. And so with bee houses, you'll be getting, in North America anyways, you'll be getting 2 different types of bees. And those are the leaf cutters, which is one of them that I talked about earlier. And then also one called the mason bee, which are really cool too.
If you have a look at our little pollinator house, we've got one here that hasn't been used and one that has been used. And we'll show you that now on camera if we can. And you can see the way the bees have just moved in and found the little bamboo tubes. And when they've found that space, you can actually, it really depends. Sometimes you get a whole lot of high traffic from in your pollinator house with a lot of different species getting in there. And
oh, that looks great.
You can see the mud and the resin in these tubes of the tubes that have been used. So almost every single tube in this one has been used. And this pollinator house was situated actually under shelter up on our veranda. And that seems to be a really good spot for them. The bees really love it when they've got a bit of shelter, and you tend to get quite busy days where you're watching lots of different species coming in and out and doing their work. And it's really neat that they just find the pollinator houses and away they go.
That's so cool. I will say too, with the bee houses, sometimes you'll get spiders or wasps also moving in. And those are still, beneficial insects as well. Like spiders are definitely good to have around, and same with wasps too. I mean, they're good. They're good at taking care of the pest insects. So sometimes you won't get the bees that you're looking for, but you'll get other insects moving in that are also very good.
Fantastic. Just on the pollinator house that we've just shown, can you tell which bees have sort of filled in the gaps? Like some of it looks like sort of quartz crystal, and some looks like mud. And how can you tell which is which?
So the crystal-looking ones are the resin bees. So what they do is they go and collect resin from trees, and they'll use that to basically pack down the tube. They'll lay their eggs in there, then they'll repack some more, and that they make these little resin, homes for their larvae. And the typical one we get around here is a fire-tailed resin bee. And the fire-tailed resin bee has this bright fire tail, but the bright fire tail actually is the pollen that's collecting on the hairs at the back underneath. So and it's got these kind of blue wings. I don't know if you've got an image of the fire-tailed resin bee, Joe, but it's a particularly stunning, beautiful Australian native bee as well. So it's so interesting to get in there and learn about it, and learn about the different species that are around in your garden. And it's a great family activity to do as well. And it's so neat. Kids get right into it, and it's an important piece of education, because in the end what we need to do is put away the sprays and get out the habitat. So if we can get out the habitat, that a pollinator house, look at that, that's beautiful fire-tailed resin bee. It's an incredible striking Australian native bee there. That's a shot I took right beside my house as it's foraging on a Tulsi basil. I love the Tulsi basil. Look at that.
That's amazing.
So neat. So yeah, it's amazing once you get into it. It becomes quite addictive looking at these beautiful insects that are so important to make our world go round. And if we look after them, then they'll look after us. So the Pollinator Project for us is, yes, it's raising funds. Yes, it's using upcycled product. But more importantly, it's inspiring people to get out there in the garden. So if you don't have our pollinator house, then you can make one just by collecting reeds or little tubes, or you might pack some mud into an area for things like the blue banded bee here in Australia, or just leave parts of your garden unkept, leave some wild spaces. Our world has drastically reduced in wild spaces, and wild spaces is what our creatures need. It's what these native bees need. So leave some parts of your garden wild for the native bees to move in. You can assist it by creating some habitat, and there's some great images and ideas online about how to build your own pollinator houses, and it's a wonderful piece of education for your whole family.
Fantastic. Cedar, people asking with the pollinator houses, if they purchase one, where's the best place to locate them? Like, do they have to be off the ground, or?
You know, from what I've found, I've put them out in the garden and I've put them undercover. It's the ones undercover that get the most traffic. I think they really appreciate the nice dry space. So if you've got a part of your house that can provide a bit of shelter, whether it's underneath your house or whether it's under your veranda, or perhaps there's something else out in the yard that has an extra bit of shelter. It has a little bit of shelter on your pollinator house here, and it will get used out in the garden, but it will get used even more if it's situated with even more shelter. So that's a thing to factor in. It doesn't need to be in the sun. It can be in the shade, and literally we've actually put a little point in the back of this. If you have a look here, and provided a nice long screw, you can screw that screw into the wall, and then it hooks right into this shape here, so it can hang on the wall like a picture frame. So that's a nice thing to do on the outside of your house somewhere. And it looks beautiful as well.
It's a really nice bee house.
We put a bit of effort into researching the bees, and what we found was a lot of pollinator houses were doing really short little tubes, which are a bit easier to get hold of. So we made the length longer, knowing that a lot of species actually require a much longer length of tube to raise their young.
And what about up in the roof there, Cedar? Are there tubes, or do the bees go inside the roof there?
So there's these little holes in the side, and then in the top, it's a good idea to pack a bunch of mulch, because there's bees that'll be in mulch like this, and leaves and so on, and there's bees that like tubes, and there's bees that like holes in wood. One thing that this house isn't accommodating is the ones that like the mud. So when you set up your pollinator space, see if you can allow some area that has some bare mud for things like the blue banded bee and the teddy bear bee to raise their young in.
Fantastic. Don't you love those names, the blue banded and the teddy bear? It's so good. Lloyd's asking, how do the bees cope with the wind? Do they get blown off course?
Bees can fly incredibly fast, and they're also very clever at flying. So even on a day where the wind speed is exceeding their flying speed, they'll then fly low and use the wind shadow. And yes, they'll get blown around a bit and they'll get blown off course a bit, but they're incredible at navigating. So they'll be able to find their way back to where they're going.
Fantastic. I guess it's the same as the rain as well.
Rain's an interesting one, and it's a video we've been meaning to make. It is bees in the rain and how they navigate. So stay tuned. We'll probably show you a beautiful video of bees attempting to fly in heavy rain. We've got time for a couple more questions.
Cedar, with the pollinator house, do you need to paint it or oil it like the flow hives?
You don't have to. You can leave it just naked and bare, and after a while it'll go like a silvery grey colour. But it has this kind of in-between phase where it's not grey and it's not wood, and that doesn't look as good. It looks nice when it goes all like that silvery grey wood, that outdoor look. Alternatively, you can do what we do on our flow hives and show and use a oil. You want to use one that's not doesn't have a strong chemical scent to it, because you don't want to put off your bees. But this one you're looking at here was oiled a couple of years ago. So it's been a couple of years of oil. And but if you want it to, if you're having a look at our flow hive there, if you want to maintain that beautiful wood look, you'll have to rub it back and give it another coat of oil every 6 months to a year, because in the end, nature's trying to turn it back into the earth in the end. So some effort will need to go into keeping it looking like that beautiful raw wood look.
Fantastic. And a final question for you, Anthony. Just with the farms and with the project, what sort of native seeds will they be getting?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we'll be working with Applewood Seed Company, and so they'll be sourcing seeds that are regionally specific for the farm, which is really good. So that way, wherever the farm is located in the US, they'll be getting seeds with plants that are meant to be in that area. So that's a really good setup, and really thankful for that partnership. And yes, it'll be a nice variety of native flowers again, so that the bees are getting a whole variety of different nectar and pollen, and that way they're getting that like perfectly healthy diet. So yeah, that's where they'll be sourced.
And where can people get all that information, Anthony? Because I see applications close on the 31st of October. How do people get in contact to be part of this program?
Yeah, so it's right on our homepage on our website, pollinator.org, and then it's one of the first features on our homepage there.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for all of those that are tuning in and asking such great questions. Today we've had Anthony Colangelo tell us about his Pollinator Partnership. It's something that we've been helping fund the native seed grants across the USA. We're also going to be helping fund bring the amazing work that they're doing at the Pollinator Partnership and the bee-friendly farming to Australia. So that's an exciting thing coming up. And it's great that you've been putting so much work into such an important thing. And thank you so much for dedicating your life to helping the unsung heroes of our world, the little native bees that do their extremely important pollination. And thank you all for watching and listening. There'll be links below if you get inspired and get into either bee-friendly farming or creating your pollinator gardens, or if you want to get one of our pollinator houses, they are also available as of today for pre-order for the next fundraising round, and hopefully we can raise more funds and support more projects in the world to help all of the amazing and beautiful native bee species, some of them extremely threatened, and they need all the help that we can give them. Thank you very much for tuning in.
Awesome, and thanks, Cedar, for having me as well, and for all the great work that you and Flo are doing. It's awesome.